You know what? I'm going to be completely honest with you. It's a terrible secret of mine, one that I would never tell anybody but you, a bunch of complete strangers. I hate change. Like, it drives me nuts, and it always has. For instance, I vividly remember sitting down one dinner when I was 8 years old and listening to my dad's announcement that, due to his work, we were moving from our home state of Michigan to a wild, exotic, and frankly inhospitable land, Texas. Before waiting until the end of this announcement, I understandably broke down and ran off sobbing. But though I no longer outwardly react to changes in this way, I still often feel confused, worried, and upset whenever my expectations and routines get torn to shreds. Maybe that's something you can relate to as well. Sure, not all change is good change, but do we have to dislike and fear changes to our lives? Well, the simple answer is no, but the long answer is what I would like to present to you today. We're first going to figure out why we're uncomfortable with change. Second, find out why we need it. And third, understand how we can embrace it. So let's dive in by first looking at, why we're uncomfortable with change. The first thing we need to recognize is that we're most comfortable with a routine. So when change disrupts our pre-planned routine, we often feel exposed and empty because we can no longer do things and live as we're used to. Personally, I struggle with adjusting to schedule changes, as you can probably tell by this point. In fact, when my sister Kinsey left off for college back in 2017, I felt that an essential part of life was gone. I could neither say goodbye to her as she left off for school in the mornings, nor hear an episode of the Great British Bake Off, one of our favorite shows, in the evenings. And these things made me feel, quite insecure. You can probably relate to these feelings if you've ever had to watch one of your own kids or friends move on to a new stage of life, leaving you behind with only memories. Ultimately, though there are various personal reasons that people might have for disliking change, there's one fundamentally human desire that causes all of us to be uncomfortable with it: a need to be in control of our lives. In fact, according to Walter Thomas Bourbon, an American behavioral scientist, in the article Perceptual Control Theory, people's lives are basically an uninterrupted series of attempts to maintain control and to prevent any undesirable change from occurring. We don't like change, simply put, because it often happens without our consent, thereby waking us up from the fantasy that we're in control of our lives. It confronts our desire to walk through life with a my will be done mindset, when we're actually called to have a thy will be done mindset. Ultimately, change doesn't have to be our arch enemy, as God actually created us as beings who desperately need change. This is because the unfamiliarity and difficulty that change often brings often grows us far more than we could by simply living it safe. For instance, change outside our control pushes us out of our comfort zone and therefore expands what we're mentally or physically capable of. When my mom made me join the Boy Scouts of America back in 2018, I had no clue what I was getting myself into. Once I did, I found that I much preferred staying in my nice, air-conditioned house and dreaded literally every single campout my mom dragged me to go to. But gradually, after spending many hours outdoors at beautiful locations, learning and applying dozens of exciting skills, and finally serving several leadership roles, I not only loved camping, but was much more in shape, independent, and just confident in my capabilities. If I had chosen to simply follow my feelings and stay at home, none of these amazing developments would ever have happened. After reflecting on these scouting experiences, I've recognized that everyone can be trapped by their own version of a safe house that prevents them from ever reaching the heights God has envisioned for them. Maybe there are problems in your life that seem to be pushing you out of your comfort zone. If so, that's actually a blessing, because experiencing difficult changes can help us grow spiritually as Christians. Whenever we are put in uncomfortable situations or tested past our limits, we could either blame God for that and crumple, Or we could have faith that there are opportunities to rely on ourselves less and on Him more. If we are never forced to step outside our comfort zones, we can never become who God wants us to be. Ultimately, though we may not like all change we receive, the fact is we do need it to grow both physically and spiritually. So let us strive to therefore embrace change in the way God has called us to. But how do we embrace change? That's a great question. I'm so glad you asked. You see, it's a two-step process. We first need to react to it positively. Then we need to choose to move on, accepting the situation for what it is. Let's look at that first step, choosing to have a more positive reaction whenever that change happens. So for instance, instead of immediately looking for the negatives that a change has brought, what if we counted its blessings or grew another excited about an opportunity to grow closer to God? Now let's look at that second step, choosing to accept the situation. Probably the hardest one of the two. But whenever we simply acknowledge our lack of control and give the situation up to God, asking Him to work it for good, then we can experience just so much more peace and joy in our lives. That said, changing our view and change is hard. I'll be the first one to admit it. But it is worth it, as I've personally seen through my two grandmothers. Both my mom's mom, whom I call Nana, and my dad's mom, whom I call Grandma, were experiencing great health difficulties and, let's say, troubling diagnoses these past few years. Both of their diseases were incurable. My Nana decided to react to this change with bitterness and despair, thus becoming miserable for the rest of her life. She refused to get out of her pajamas because she was so depressed. But I'm not saying this to put my Nana down or to berate her. It's because I loved her so much that I'm telling you this story, so that others don't fall into the same trap she did. My grandma, on the other hand, refused to lose faith when she heard about our health problems, and instead chose joy. She not only accepted that change, but continually goes out several times a week to widows or shut-ins from her church, bringing cards, gifts, or simply her love to them. Today, I still have my grandma. I don't have my Nana. What would be the reason for this change to reality? Well, one woman, my grandma, resolved to embrace a change and let God handle her circumstances, while the other one resolved to give in to the change, dwelling on it, causing her to lose the battle of cancer much earlier than if she continued to fight at all. So, would you be the PJ wearer or the widow visitor? Even though it's not easy when change comes your way, every day we have a choice to be either like my Nana, who let her situation overwhelm her, or my grandma, who never gives up. In conclusion, we often dread having to experience great changes in our lives. To be honest, change is often confusing, disappointing, and worrying. It alters and takes away what we have in our lives, just who we have in our lives, and just how we view the world. But despite all the possibility of that change might bring, we don't have to fear it. Why? Well, take it from me. Though I personally don't enjoy responding to change in a biblical way, I now recognize what a blessing it can be and has been in my life. For instance, who knows if I'd be standing here before you today if I never left my home state of Michigan. My hope today is that by being honest about both my unhealthy relationship with change and the amazing things it has brought to my life, that others would seek to embrace it as well, regardless of their history with it. So the next time you're tempted to keep on your PJs and to dwell on whatever bad change you're going through, I'd encourage you to think of my grandmother, who accepted her change and embraced it with a "thy will be done" mindset, so that she could still be a blessing to others.